On the 24th of October 2020, 790 candidates were on the ballot papers for local government elections right across Victoria. Of those 790, only 4 were Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders. That's less than 0.15%. Now, of those 4, 2 were eventually elected. Ashley Vandenberg in Melton, a Wiradjuri woman, and further north in the state of Victoria, we have Yorta Yorta man Greg James, and he joins us today as the first Aboriginal man elected to the Greater Shepparton City Council. Greg, I want to ask you, you're an artist, a teacher, a builder, a consultant, and you're now a politician. It isn't a profession that's drawn all that many First Nations people over the years. What was it that motivated you to run as a candidate?
Sure. It's interesting that over the years I've sort of always had that inspiration to be involved in as a key leader of my community. Yeah. And of course, going from the building industry into education and my involvement in sport, and being involved in a number of key stakeholder committees, and being board members of my local co-op and a board member of Reconciliation Victoria, it just felt to me there was a natural extension for me to take it to that next level. And of course, from my family point of view, that the inspiration for me also, and has always been from my ancestors and my great-grandfathers and my forefathers, and just to acknowledge their work that they done back in the late 1800s and the early 1920s. And they really planted the seed in regards to resilience and standing up for the rights and entitlements for Aboriginal people. So I guess I always had that within me, within my mantra and my soul and my spirit. And I guess, for want of a better word, it was in my DNA on my great-grandfather's side. So I always wanted, and I always had that inspiration to say, I want to be in a position where I can make some real effective changes for my people, and I can do it as I am, as going about my normal life and etc. But to make the real changes to going from a tokenistic changes to a real effective changes, it's for me to be in government, in local government, where I'm at the forefront. I can actually make those real positive changes.
And we'll get on to some of those changes in just a couple of minutes. But
sure.
As I mentioned before, the number of First Nations candidates in the last elections was minimal and nowhere near representative of the true percentage of Victorians who are First Nations.
Yep.
What are some of the key factors that are holding back Aboriginal people and Torres Strait Islander people for running at the local government level?
I guess in the past, and I thought about standing, 7 or 8 years ago, and previous elections too as well. And we did have a couple of our community members that put their hand up, but didn't really fully commit with a strong campaign, or without the support of their people and their elders in their community. And I guess in the past, because governments haven't been a real harmonious place for our people, there's been a lot of hurt incurred by governments.
Absolutely, yeah.
And there had been a feeling from a lot of our elders to say, no, we don't want you to go into government, because if you go into government, you're going to lose your cultural strength and what you stand for. Although it's important, it was a catch-22, I guess, because yes, we do need coloured people, First Nations people it's important to have us in that government to campaign for a number of reasons, but also there's a risk but you're going to lose your cultural strength and your identity in the government circles too.
Do you see that as a risk, a potential risk?
I can see it as a potential risk, because you do get consumed in a lot of what's happening in the community, and you're there to make decisions on the community. I could see that happening, but I guess it's up to the individual person and what your cultural strength is too as well, and your allegiance to your traditional owners and your customs and your culture, and how you conduct yourself as a proud Aboriginal man. From my point of view, that will always remain. My culture is always entrenched in me, and it will always be at the forefront in regards to me as a person. and then the decisions about government come secondary to that.
But talking about culture and decisions of government, it leads quite nicely into the fact that a lot of local governments, well, governments at all levels now, are starting to pay attention to the cultural practices of traditional owners when it comes to the environment, specifically the land and the waterways. And we see around Victoria there's a crying need for that. The past couple of years has told us that all too clearly. Do you see that there's an advantage with having Aboriginal counsellors in place to bridge that traditional divide that's existed between government and those practices or practitioners of these cultural practices?
I think it's a great opportunity for councils to do that, to try and encourage traditional owners and Aboriginal people in all of their operations, but particularly when it comes to land and water and environment, and really, of late, is we're talking about, greenhouse gases and emissions and etc. And just the great opportunity for councils now to work with traditional owners in regards to how they do their cultural burns and how they do the fire burning programs. I think that's an opportunity that councils need to grasp firmly and to say, you know what, for us to make our council a lot more effective and a lot more conducive towards a proper way of doing our burnings and to do it from an environmentally friendly way, well, let's negotiate and let's have discussions with traditional owners and First Nations people, because they've been doing it for quite some time. And we think, and to think about, well, they know how to do it properly. Let's take some lessons for them, but let's do it in a partnership too as well, and where we can learn from them, from that traditional owner people. And plus, we're doing it in an environmentally way, which is protecting the ozone, and it's protecting the animals and the plant life and everything that exists within their communities. So I think it's a great opportunity that councils need to seize that moment and also to be brave and be bold and go out there and consult and communicate.
Does it make it easier for Shepparton though to have you as a counsellor?
Yep. Well, it sure does, because it's something that I brought to I also with my campaign, and I said, we have the normal 3 R's. Every council has the normal standard.
The roads, rates and rubbish.
We know that the roads and rates and rubbish is always going to be debatable, and in the current climate, councils need to consider the effects of COVID and give our ratepayers a bit of a leniency in regards to that, and some help them out in regards to that, because it's tough times. But at the same time, my campaign was focusing around not only those issues, but about providing and incentivizing our current businesses, and also both new and established businesses, provide some incentives for them to remain strong and to build on the economic fabric that we have in this greater Golden Valley. But also the opportunity for me was also a great opportunity for me to campaign to say, we have beautiful parklands, we have native bushlands, we're on the cusp of rivers here in Shepparton in the Golden Valley. We have the Dungarly, the Goulburn River. We have, the Bulla, which is the Broken Creek, and little tributaries that flow in, and then we have the magnificent Murray River, which is the Dungarly. So we're in this environment. So my campaign was about that. So let's not turn our back on the river. Let's make sure that we are in a position so the whole of community, councils, local governments, traditional owners, and community work together in beautifying a river. Let's not turn our back. Let's make sure the quality of the water is protected and everything associated with the waters and landways, because our waterways is a vein of our country. It's so important. It's the giver of life. And of course, from our perspective, it was a main source of our food too as well, in regards to the fish and every other animal that utilised the river. Well, that was our little delicatessen. That was our cafes. So it's so important for us to look after the land. But not only the land and the environment, it's about culture inclusion too as well, and how this council can be a lot more stronger with its culture, a lot more stronger in the way they go about addressing and enhancing Aboriginal culture within their constituencies.
Well, talking of culture and constituencies, Shepparton is really becoming increasingly a multicultural, incredibly diverse community. Over the past 10 years, there's been approximately a 20% increase in the population of those who were not born here in Australia. And I think about a 23% increase, or roughly thereabouts, of those who've come from a non-English speaking background. What role does an Aboriginal counsellor have, if any, in providing those people from a multicultural environment with a voice and not necessarily muscle, but a presence within the local government?
A very good question, and Shepparton, the Golden Valley area has been very fortunate in regards to post-war, pre-war and post-war immigration policies, and there was a great immigration, influx into Australia, pre-war, post-war.
Yeah.
It was mainly from that migrant group. The multicultural group was Italians, Arabs, and etc. And then you've got a modern day immigration group. So at that stage, our the traditional owners here in Shepparton, Golden Valley area, is a very large population, around about 6,000 to 7,000, which we constitute 10% of the overall population in Shepparton region. And then we have a further 10% made up of multicultural groups too as well, which is the Italians and etc. And then there's a new wave of immigrants, which is Congolese and people from from Iraq and Iran and Sudanese and Congolese and etc. and Indians and Vietnamese and Chinese. So we have a new wave of immigrants. Plus we have the post and pre-war immigrants, and then you have traditional owners, and then you have people from European background, which is the first settlement. So you have a great blend, where a town and a community which has become not only multicultural, but it's become very cosmopolitan too as well. How does Aboriginal culture fit within those multicultural groups? Well, it's about the education is the key to that, with that multicultural group, and about working together, because a lot of those groups, of course, are coloured skinned people.
Yep.
And they do suffer a lot of the problems of racism and stereotyping, and disadvantage from non-Aboriginal people, non-Indigenous people, etc. And they're finding it very hard to position themselves in our environment, in our society too, as well, in the community. Our First Nations approach to people from other countries is we welcome them to our land, as well as what we do any other person, any other human being. We respect their culture, but also we say to them, let's work together. You're living on our land. These are our values, and etc. Now, Aboriginal history is Australia's history. It's very, very much intrinsic to that overall culture itself. We have a great relationship with our multicultural groups, and it's one that I've focused on because of their culture, their rich and diverse culture. And it's the same, not the same, of course, it's different, but their values are the same as ours. We have a rich and diverse culture which revolves around dance and song, which is really important. Of course, ours is the oldest surviving culture, and some of their cultures are very old too as well, but we are the oldest surviving culture, with a lot of things, a lot of government draconian policies to try and break our culture up, and we've stood there with resistance. So multiculturalism will always be a part of every local LGA throughout Australia, because of our immigration policies, and a lot of people wanting to come to Australia because of our beautiful country, and the freeness, I guess, which is attached from the overseas rhetoric, is about Australia is a free country.
Do you find that your background, your history, your culture lends yourself to connect better than may otherwise have been the case with these people, and represent their voices in local government?
I think so, because people from other countries, of course, when they arrive to Australia, they through your citizenships programs and etc. And that's something that I'm sort of confident and feeling quite good about. I can see some changes there and some shifts in regards to the paradox of people's thinking, and multiculturalism in Australia, and people coming to our country feel safe in the environment because they believe that there are changes occurring. And because we have a younger generation now, which is the education and curriculum has changed quite considerably in regards to that respect of other people from other cultures. And we're seeing, dance, song and dance and multicultural days and recognition days right throughout, across our calendar of events, throughout the year, right across Australia. So there is broader acceptance of people from other cultures, but there is also an increasing knowledge and understanding about First Nations people and their connection and association with this land. And I think the changes are occurring, although not dramatically, but there have been some really slow changes in regards to that. And I'm really confident about that. And I think local councils can play a really important role in that, doing that too as well. Particularly from my perspective, where I am now at the moment, it's providing me the opportunity to have these discussions with my fellow councillors and my council officers and the community in regards to some of those curly issues that we were reluctant to talk about in the past, or didn't have that conversation because there was an Indigenous councillor there, so they would have a discussion about it, but it was a discussion which was glossed over and moved on. Now that with my presence on the council, I can have that conversation and take it to the next level in regards to an understanding and appreciation about the cultural sensitivity attached to some of these social justice issues, but a more in an informal discussion with my fellow councillors. So that positions me now in that role to have an improved and have an open, intelligent discussions with my councillors, but in a culturally safe way and in a culturally sensitive way too as well.
Talking about curly issues and being the Aboriginal voice there, it really begs the question. Shepparton has the largest Aboriginal population of any regional area across Victoria. You mentioned before it's up at about 10%. That doesn't surprise me the least bit. As the only Aboriginal councillor, have you found that there have been, I suppose, unexpected expectations placed on you by the Aboriginal community, and how do you deal with those? Because you mentioned before, you've got to be across all the issues, not just the black issues.
Yeah, absolutely. When I was standing campaigning, and I often, I thought about that quite often, and I thought, I'm not, I'm putting myself up there as a candidate, and of course a lot of my community were right behind me, and the ultimate tick of approval for me was the Elders Council approached me and said, "Son, you have to stand because we need an Aboriginal voice on council." Yeah. And so I was really chuffed with that, and I was very honoured that that the Elders Council approached me and said, "It is now time for us to have an Aboriginal voice on council." But not only for us as Aboriginal people, but for the wider community of Shepparton to have an Aboriginal person on that council. So I was really pleased and very honoured, for my elders and my peers to bestow that honour on me. And so I approached that, and I thought, it's a huge task and a lot of pressure for me to take up this role. And I said, not only am I a counsellor, but I'm an Indigenous person too as well. I'm a traditional owner. So I have an obligation not only for the community, the wider community of Shepparton, but I have an obligation for my people too as well.
How do you manage the balance?
Yeah, it's really hard, but what really makes it easier for me is I have the Elders Council and elders in our community I've now provided that voice for them to come to me and say, "Greg, we want you to be a little bit more affirmative. We want to be a little bit affirmative about stolen generations. We want you to be a little bit more sterner, a little bit affirmative about racial problems, racism problems in our community. We want this. We want to have you to have this discussion. We want our reconciliation action plan, which we've got with our council. We want that to be a little bit more top heavy. We want it to be a little bit more affirmative. We want educational outcomes, and we want more culture, knowledge spread throughout our community." So the opportunity for me to do that, to be able to be in that position, I feel quite quite honoured about doing that.
So you don't feel conflicted at all?
No, I don't. And I regularly go out and talk to my to the youth too as well. I have a great Indigenous youth council which I established through my Rumballara Aboriginal cooperative, and so I constantly go to the youth and I go to the elders. So I cover both, from a youth forum perspective and from an elders perspective. So there are great checks and balances from me, from my own people, to say, and quite some strong messages and affirmative messages. If I don't get it wrong, well, I've got a fairly critical audience here to say, no, you need to go back and no, that's not right. You need to go back to council and say, no, we want another position on this. So that to me is great, because I've got the direction out there. I've got the direction from my mob to say, no, I'm not happy with that. But I also get the congratulations from my mob too, to say, good job. Now let's keep going on with this. So there's as I say, there's
checks and balances.
Yeah. And I guess that applies to every councillor. Your real checks and balances out there are the community, your constituents who vote for you. They put you in there. They entrust you to be that doyen for you on behalf of the community. And I've taken up that role quite well. And I've said to my fellow councillors, and I've said to council officers, to say, I'm very honoured to be selected as a candidate, as a councillor in my community. And I said, and that's an honour which I really enjoy. And I said, but even more so as an Indigenous councillor, and to be the first councillor appointed to this council, I am absolutely honoured and so excited to be in that position. But I said, I want my councillors and this council to understand that any red, yellow and black issue that comes to our table is not just Councillor James's responsibility. Yeah. It is the responsibility of my fellow councillors and this council to address too as well. Because I don't want, that would put extreme pressure on me as a sole individual, Aboriginal person. But I said, but it's too big of a burden for me to handle. And I said, it's the issues, which is the whole of the council, not just Councillor James. As a traditional owner and an Aboriginal person, it is the responsibility of everyone here to address the issues in our community, whether it's an Aboriginal issue, whether it's a Turkish issue, or whatever the case may be. Because we, on our council, we also have a lot of councillors that come from cultural backgrounds on there too as well. We've had 3 Muslim mayors in the last 5 to 6 years on this council. So we have 3 Muslims as candidates in the council. So there's a great, blend of diversity on the council too as well.
Greg, we're still 3 years off the next Victorian local government elections. Still just a shade over 3 years. Last question. What words would you have for any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people, young, old, in between, across the state and even beyond our state, who may be considering putting their names forward as a candidate for the next local government elections?
Look, I in establishing my youth council, part of that role and part of my role too as well, I was really excited about, is getting the position. It's now in a power of me for in that position to empower my people too as well. And my appointment, I see it as, for me, being the catalyst in regards to a pathway too as well, for my young Indigenous leaders in our community to follow in my footsteps. And I want them to take on board what I've done, and I want them to actually to stand against me in the next election.
It's a rough game though, isn't it? Local governments is not an easy game.
It sure is. My advice to my fellow brothers and sisters around Victoria is, get invested in your local community, with your local co-ops. Make sure that we are involved in non-Indigenous committees and forums too as well. And if there's any opportunity that you can get to speak about our culture and the social justice issues, so that you can broaden the understanding and knowledge of our culture and the issues that we go to at the broader forum in your community, well, I encourage you to do that, so that there is a perspective, there is a voice out there, but people are getting an improved understanding about what our specific needs are in regards to you, the Aboriginal culture, and what are the needs of you within your community. I would encourage our mob to be more involved in that and to be not vocal, yes, to be vocal, but also be involved in what is happening in your community.
Yeah.
And be involved in, and you know, to be involved in what is happening around our community at the same time, not to lose your identity and your culture, but to have that culture be part of that spread within your community. And I'd encourage all of our mob, we need more people at local elections, because that's where a lot of the decisions are made for and behalf of the community.
Yeah.
And if more Indigenous people are in there making the decisions, well then I think we're going to build a better and stronger community in our towns.
We can only hope for those sorts of changes.
Yeah.
Councillor Greg James, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much.